My name is Kelly Campbell, and my book is entitled The Working Girl's Guide to Rehabbing Houses.
Book Lovers Unite. I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. In continuing with our New Year theme, I wanted to bring you another motivational episode to help start this new year off right. So today I'll be speaking with Kelly Campbell to help tackle those goals you've set for yourself this year. Kelly is the author of The Working Girl's Guide to Rehabbing Houses. And this will be a great episode for people who've thought about flipping houses or just want to read up on the subject. Kelly is a sought-after business coach, nutritional advisor, motivational speaker, and has built a successful real estate business rehabbing homes in the D.C. area. Today she'll be reading from her book and talking with us about her experiences, and she'll explain to us what exactly goes into rehabbing houses. And it starts right now.
This section of the book is about working with contractors. This is a question that I get so frequently because I think there's a lot of fear around picking the right contractor, as there should be. I call my very first project the Harvard University of Rehab. That project is one of the reasons I decided to write this book because anything that could go wrong went wrong. I learned so much working through that project, but I learned it all the hard way. And in this business, mistakes are very expensive. I remember on that project that my partner at the time brought in a guy to install our kitchen cabinets. He was a friend of hers. I believe he was a building supervisor or superintendent during the day, and he would come over and work on our house at night. This is the first bad sign. He was installing our kitchen. I happened to be there when he arrived with the new cabinets. Sometime after he started to install the first wall cabinet, he realized that one of the cabinets was missing. He'd forgotten it at the store. Instead of stopping what he was doing and going back to the store to find the missing cabinet, he continued installing the cabinets anyway. You see, when contractors are working at your house in their spare time, they tend to rush through the most basic steps in the process. He installed one cabinet on the left side of the wall, one cabinet on the right, and of course, he was missing the cabinet in the middle. Can you see where this is going? The next day, he returns with the new cabinet, immediately realizes that it doesn't fit in between, shocking, and so he pulls out a Sawzall, also known as a reciprocating saw. This type of saw has cutting action that's achieved through push and pull motion of the blade. In other words, he used a vibrating saw to cut a straight line. He proceeds to cut the side of the cabinet to make it fit. He cuts the most uneven, jagged edge you can imagine on the side of this brand new cabinet and then wedges it in between the other cabinets. It looked absolutely horrible. And at this point, I realized that something is terribly wrong. I reach out to another friend who's an engineer and a contractor and ask him to come by so we can figure out how to correct this problem. When he arrives, he just stares at the scene in front of him for a seemingly endless number of minutes. He cocks his head to one side, reaches up, grabs one of the cabinets, and pops it right off the wall. The first guy had installed the cabinets with glue. Yes, glue. Now, of course, we had to buy a new cabinet and reinstall the kitchen, which was ridiculous. But this is an example of what can happen when you hire unskilled workers. The lesson that I learned from this very expensive experience is that you do not want Pete in a pickup or Chuck in a truck doing your rehab. You need a licensed general contractor. The contractor should be someone who has experience, who can show you their past history. You need to ask for examples of projects that they've completed, referrals from past clients, or referrals from people who are happy with their work. I make these calls all the time for contractors who work for me. Your contractor should have a list of people that can say, hey, this guy does a good job. I'm happy with what he did with my house. This is one of many lessons that I learned with the Harvard University of Rehab. So remember, a contractor, a handyman, and a guy with a hammer are not all one and the same. Their level of care, commitment, and dedication to your project is not the same. And also consider the time factor. If you need somebody to fix the kitchen or the garbage disposal at your house, you're not on a clock, quote unquote. When you're using other people's money on a rehab, every day costs you money. Time, quality, and care is absolutely critical.
Wow, that was reading?
Yeah.
It sounded like you were just talking to me.
That's kind of the voice that I wanted the book to be in, to feel like you were sitting down with someone
Yeah.
who was sharing their experience with you, but in a way that you could learn from it. You're getting the education, but in a way in which you can absorb it all so that it doesn't feel like a textbook.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what a lot of folks need, especially when they're going into something like this for the first time.
Oh, yes. And sometimes you need a visual on why something is a bad idea. It's really easy when it comes to rehabbing to think about your uncle or your cousin who could come over after work and pop some kitchen cabinets in for you. But you have so much on the line when your money is invested. Is it really worth the risk?
And just kind of a layman's question. Is rehabbing houses the same as flipping houses, or are they different?
Oh, bad word, bad word. So flipping houses. Yes, rehabbing houses is buying a house, fixing it up, actually investing in the house, which theoretically raises the value, and then selling it
Mm-hmm.
at market price, at whatever market price should be. Flipping a house technically is buying a house and then putting a higher price tag on it and selling it without ever doing anything to it. That is technically what is called a flip. So you might
Oh,
get a house cheap, and then you just put a different price on it and you sell it. And there was a time, that's a very, very bad word, where people were doing that in some major cities and ripping people off, essentially. And a lot of appraisers and a lot of investors got into a lot of trouble for quote unquote flipping.
mm-hmm.
So we don't like to use that word. So
Oh,
that's why
right.
we use the word rehabbing.
Yeah, okay. And that actually makes sense. So I guess back
Mm-hmm.
in the market crash in 2008, it wasn't only predatory lending that was the culprit, but it was also tactics like that.
Correct. Exactly. You
Yeah.
got it.
I'm really glad to speak with you today because I think this will be very beneficial to a lot of our listeners and readers. Most people are familiar with shows like Property Brothers and Flip That House, and there's a lot of people who've probably considered rehabbing houses themselves. So, how does your book help those people?
I think my book covers a lot of the details that sometimes are not mentioned on those type of shows because they're not entertainment worthy, but they're really necessary part of understanding the process, especially when you have so much invested. So I tried to present an introduction to rehabbing on a really basic level, but provide a lot of meat in the book when it comes to specific details. Um, I hear from a lot of people that they've taken a class on rehabbing houses, but when they got home, they didn't know how to get started.
Hmm.
They were fed a lot of information, but there were details that were missing that prevented them from having the confidence to actually do a deal. So I tried to fill in those gaps with my book so that someone could read the book and at least know the basic steps they needed to take to get started.
Right. Is rehabbing property different from buying homes in general?
It is, because you could buy homes to hold on to be a landlord, or also called buy and hold. And over time, that property, 90% of the time, it will appreciate in value over a long term. So you could call that a long term strategy. The market may go up, the market may go down. But over 20 or 30 years of the loan you might have or your investment in that long term strategy, you can assume that your mortgage will go down and the value will go up.
Hmm.
With a rehab, it's completed in a very short period of time. So you can't bank on the market helping you do your deal. You have to really, truly know what the property is worth and know what it's going to cost to fix it. And I'd say that's the biggest difference between buy and hold and rehabbing. Rehabbing, you have to have certainty.
I guarantee you that's probably one of the biggest fears as well. Or the situation that you encountered with that awful contractor. Can't even imagine.
The best way to overcome that fear is to really educate yourself on the market that you're working in and the value of the property.
Hmm.
If you get the value right, you can make a few mistakes with regards to repairs and still come out okay.
Hmm.
For every deal that I do, and I teach this in the book, I always add a contingency for whatever I can't see, whatever I don't know, or whatever I get wrong.
Hmm.
But if I have the value of that house wrong, I'm in the hole before I ever got started. There, you could do everything else right, and you
Yeah.
won't be able to dig out of it if you get the value wrong.
Just to clarify, when you say value, are you talking about like the actual value of the property itself, or the community or the area or the market that it's in?
The value of the property itself. What can that house that you're buying sell for once you've fixed it up? What is its worth when it's fixed up? Now, you could have the smallest house in a fabulous neighborhood, and you won't be able to get the same value as the person next door. You have to understand the value of your house.
Well, what I like about your book is that you take readers, or in this case, future investors, step by step through the process of rehabbing. And you immediately address, those big fears and pitfalls associated with something like this. And you also answer a lot of those big questions as well. There are actually chapters in your book, like where do I find money? What characteristics do I look for in a home? Even questions that we may not even think to ask ourselves when we're going through something like this. So what was your thought process as you were going through the writing of this book?
Well, I've been teaching new investors how to break into rehabbing since 2012. So I tried to address in the book the most commonly asked questions that I've received from people that have taken my classes or that have heard us speak and teach on Train Online. And there are certain questions that you hear every single class. So all of those questions I attempted to address to the best of my ability, in a way that you could walk away at least understanding exactly how you could overcome those fears and concerns.
What specifically made you write this book for the working girl? And is it practical for the working boy also?
It absolutely is. And I decided to write it from that perspective because for the first 8 years of my rehabbing career, I worked full time while I was doing it. It has provided just a higher quality of life for me. It really changed my life. I think there's a lot of places I've been and things I've done that never would have happened had I not started to rehab.
Hmm.
And I've seen what it can do in the lives of other people, even if they're working simultaneously. To be a rehabber doesn't mean you have to quit your job and rehab full time. You could do one rehab a year and pay off a student loan, send a child to college for 1 year, pay off debt. I've seen it do amazing things in the lives of people who maybe didn't take it on as a full-time career, but use it as a tool to build capital when they needed it.
And, that was one of the questions that I was wondering as well. What were, your first steps?
I am a conservative investor.
Hmm.
I'll be the first to say that. If you read my book, you will get a lot of conservative ideas on how to get started. And I started off going to real estate investment clubs and taking, any classes or finding people who were doing it and asking to follow them around in the beginning. And I probably spent 6 months to a year dancing around doing my first one before I got the guts to do it. And
Yeah.
it took a while to pull all that information together. That's another reason I wrote the book, is I wanted to put a lot of information in one place so you didn't have to run around looking for it like I did.
Let's actually go back in time
Okay.
before your very first rehab project, before you went to the closing and you signed those papers, and before you even identified a potential property, back when you were considering taking classes and learning about this stuff. What was it in you that transformed the idea of rehabbing houses into the reality of, okay, I'm going to go look at houses today? Because, that's a pretty huge and scary leap.
Oh, it definitely is. And I would say that it was fear. I was afraid to rehab a house. My first rehab, I was sick like every day from
Mm.
fear. I felt like that feeling when you go down a roller coaster and your stomach jumps up into your chest.
Oh, like
I felt
physically.
like that
Yeah.
physically. Yes. every day is how I felt on my first rehab because I was scared, but I was more scared that my life would never change. I
Mm-hmm.
was more afraid that I'd be in that same job that I was in at the time, which wasn't fun. And that I wouldn't be able to do the things that I had dreamed about doing if I didn't make a leap.
Mm-hmm.
That scared me more than the rehab.
And I imagine,
Yes.
like, at every step, you were probably doubting yourself, and you were probably just like, is this really happening? Is this really what I want? You know how that doubt creeps in.
Every step.
Mm.
But they say that people will move away from pain faster than they will move towards what they want. And the pain I was in with my job and with the way that I saw my financial future
Mm-hmm.
drove me through that rehab. I was determined to get through it. And I did it with no money or
Yeah.
almost no money.
Aside from the whole contractor fiasco, what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from your first rehab project?
From the first rehab project, I would say one of the lessons that I learned is that money is not as hard to find as people think it is.
Mm.
That's a myth in the industry that it takes money to make money.
Mm-hmm.
What it actually takes is other people's money. And that was one of the things that shocked me about that first rehab was how many people are looking for a good investment.
Hmm.
And what's better than having your money secured against a piece of property? If I don't do what I say I'm going to do, you have a tangible, valuable asset to take from me to get your money back. So that was one of the things that shocked me. I think a lot of people believe that there's something wrong with asking people for a loan. But when it comes to borrowing against real estate, that's a really great deal for a true investor.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes their investments aren't secured against anything.
Well, by investors, do you mean individual, like private investors, or are you talking about going to the bank and getting like a home mortgage?
I'm talking about both.
Mm-hmm.
More so private investors, because if credit is an issue, then that may take a bank out of play or a hard money lender out of play. But there are tons of private investors. I mean, you can put an ad in Craigslist and you'd be surprised at the phone calls that you might get where people looking for some place to put their money that's secure. And they may not be who you think they are. You can advertise for, people that you don't know, but some of the people that you do know are looking for some place to invest their money. I talk in the book about an imaginary character, but for me, in my world, in the DC metro area, there's so many of them. Like imagine someone that's worked for the government their whole life, right out of school.
Mm-hmm.
They could have worked 30 years. And depending on their position, they might have amassed $500,000 with matching in a TSA account, in their retirement account. How far can they go with that when they actually do retire? That money isn't only going to carry you but so far. But if they invested in a rehab with you and they did a 50-50 split with you, I advise my investors not to take any deal where you can't make 30 grand or more.
Yeah.
So let's say they loaned you 100 grand and you gave them back 15 in 3 to 6 months. Where could they do that? Where could they grow their money like that? And then say you did it 10 times over 5 years. That's what, $150,000? And the worst case scenario is that the market crashes in the middle of your deal, right? And you can't sell it.
Mm-hmm.
They can rent it out for cash flow. They own it outright. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the worst thing that would happen is that you couldn't sell it. In their case, that's not bad.
I hadn't even thought of it that way.
So you'd be surprised how many, long-term federal contractors or anyone that's worked a W-2 job their whole life and they haven't amassed anywhere near $1 million and might be at retirement age, how they might be willing to do a secured investment against a property that they would own outright until you've finished, split it with you because you're doing all the work, they're fronting the money, and do it over and over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. And just like last time when the market crashed, the homeowner market crashed, but the rental market skyrocketed. In fact, I would argue it's still skyrocketing.
And, a rental that's owned outright, they bring in, let's say it's $1,500 a month. That's
Mm-hmm.
not bad cash flow. So those things to think about. The getting your hands on the money may not be as difficult as you think it is.
And I'm sure that's really good news for a lot of people that are listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
So because rehabbing can be an overwhelming experience, you've not only written this book to help people, but you also provide consultations and other services as well.
I do. We provide consultation, coaching services. We have live events where we teach in person, half-day seminars, and we also have boot camps that we offer, which are boot camps are a couple of days. We have some classroom time. I love the boot camps because that's not about sitting and listening to me. We actually get into action. We've had students find properties during the boot camp, and then on the bus tour, we go out and see it, and houses have actually been purchased over that weekend experience.
Wow.
Like we've found and bought houses over the course of that time. So that's really about actually getting into action and starting to learn what you actually need to do to find those deals, getting out and looking at property, learning how to estimate repairs. Boot camps are fun.
Yeah.
And I'm working on an online program right now to be released in 2017. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. How can folks sign up for that or get more information about that program?
They can get more information about the boot camp at girlsrehabhouses.com. And right now, if they go to that page, there's a free download I created on the subject of contractors, and it's my killer contractor interview. So even if you're having work done to your own house, you can go download that interview, and it'll tell you a lot of the right questions to ask and why you need to ask.
And you also recommend not going through this process alone.
I do. I definitely recommend that for the first deal, to get a mentor, and whether it's us or it's someone in your area. And that's one of the things that I recommend in the book is how to even work with real estate agents and what type of real estate agent you should be looking for. Because I don't recommend going through the first one alone. I recommend having someone on your team that's very experienced. I put as much in the book as I possibly could, but no book can teach you all the ins and outs of rehabbing. Hands-on is still the best way to learn. So doing it with someone looking over your shoulder is always a great idea. I think that what I would like to leave your audience with is that this is absolutely doable, whether you work full-time or not. This is an achievable goal to rehab a house, and it can do so much for your life. It gives you a skill that at any time, no matter what's happening, you can go out and generate a big chunk of capital to solve any financial hurdle that you may run into, whether it's credit, whether it's debt, whether it's college tuition. They can fund another business. And for me, rehabbing really helped to fund all of my dreams, not just the dream of rehabbing a house.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me today, Kelly. I appreciate you talking to us. This was very beneficial.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
And with that, we'll wrap up another episode. Thank you to Kelly for speaking with us today, and I'm definitely looking forward to having her back on sometime. And as always, if you have a question or comment about this episode or any, or you know an author who you think will be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or send an email to info@ch1podcast.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and most importantly, help us spread the word by writing a short review and telling everyone you know about the show. That's it for me. Here's to staying motivated, inspired, and making 2017 the best it can be. Till next time.